These are the people that we asked to defend us and all the sacrifices they make. I cannot believe that they went through that. That's just something else. So, on my left, I'm a little dyslexic, is Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long. And I can't wait to hear the insides of your story. Does the person 2 doors down need any introduction at all? Next, we have Derek Wynn, who is he's the new farmer somewhere between here and Houston. And we just had a great conversation the other night, and it just, when you'll enjoy getting to hear, especially from here. And this is my idol rock star. I want to figure out how she gets up every day and is just not spitting bullets, which is what I do. So, anyways, just amazing. Okay, Teresa, give me a timeline. When did you see this is not good? It should already be ready to go.
So almost immediately, we have received notification as doctors in November of 2020 that the military was going to be the safety study advisor, and that study, C4591011 and C45901, was going to run from December 2020 until December 2023. And so when I got that email, I took a breath and I was like, well, I've done clinical research that it's going to be at least a year. You wouldn't think that they would give a vaccine to our entire fighting force before the safety study was complete. And to my great dismay, several days later, over the intercom at our clinic, they announced that everyone come get your vaccines, Moderna's here. And oh, I'm sorry, I do have to say, my opinions are my own. They do not reflect that of the United States Army, the DoD, or HHS, or any entities thereof. So that was, what I consistently saw was a complete deviation from policies and procedures. And probably another big tip-off was I went to the Global Medicine Symposium at Wright-Patt Air Force Base. It's about 150 doctors learning about emerging infectious diseases and getting deployed all around the world. And it was before President Trump locked down the country. And all of our Army, Navy, Air Force infectious disease experts were, they didn't, in a 2-week course, they didn't even want to waste 5 minutes talking about COVID, because they kept saying this is just going to be a bad flu season. We're not going to waste time talking about this. And then you'd go home at night and turn on the TV and, Trump is retooling Ford Motor Company and making ventilators, and there's just a huge mismatch. And I was like, surely our military should have the best intel on what's going on. And so there was that mismatch. But so there was not one thing, but a whole litany of things. And I do want to point out that, in the middle of seeing this stuff going south really quickly, and I don't think most people realize that when they came to the military, it was like literally coming in and saying to everyone, are you going to take the shot? And if you were a commander, if you were in a position of authority, you were immediately relieved. And if you weren't going to take it. And I will never forget kind of having all of this reality of how much damage was coming and reaching out. And as I saw Dr. McCullough on some podcast or something, and I was like, man, if I could only get a hold of some other doctor. And he not only took my phone call, but talked to me all the way from Fort Benning to Fort Rucker on my drive back. And that, tremendous, history will write that there were people that stood up and said and did things that changed the course. And I will tell you, I will never forget him saying to me, I was like, I can't believe he took my phone call. And he said, Colonel Long, we are at war. And he said, you have to take everyone's phone calls, text message. I want to thank you for that. For 5 years, I have taken every phone call and it has been brutal. And the phone calls and the text messages don't stop. Now we're dealing with the casualties. So.
Can I just ask you too, because you mentioned in there, we'll just leave it on. I know a lot of people, Pete Chambers is near and dear to our hearts. So tell me, was that the first person you picked up the phone and talked to, or was there a group of you, or how did that all come about?
So it all came about because my attorney talked me into testifying in the Robert B. Austin case. And he said, Dr. McCullough is going to write an affidavit. Will you come behind him? I'm like, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army. No one cares. I can't come behind Peter McCullough. Like, I'm like, they don't care who I am. I'm just a lieutenant colonel. And I wrote this affidavit and thought it was going to be seen in a courtroom with a bunch of attorneys in Colorado, and that was it. And someone, I won't name who, very unethical, took a draft of my affidavit and put it on the internet. And it actually ended up serving God's purpose because it went viral. And the thing about that was, anybody who's in the military knows that you can go on Outlook and look up anyone in the military. And so all of these people, millions of people, saw my name, went on Outlook, pulled up my name, my phone number, my address, and my life has not been the same because I literally was fielding thousands of phone calls and emails from people desperate to know if I was real. And I will say this, they were asking that because when my affidavit went viral and before we put it out there, one of my big concerns was my social media posts and if people are going to tear me apart for anything and everything I've ever done. I was wiped off the internet. When my affidavit went viral, people didn't think I existed because if you Googled me, I didn't exist. They had so completely wiped me off the internet. And I had people on my post saying, hey, when they call the clinic looking for you, we're told to tell them that you've never worked here. And when they call the unit wanting to speak to you, reporters and everything, we're told basically the same thing, that you didn't work here. They don't know who I am. So there was a lot of service members, a lot of people across the country who did their due diligence to reach out to me and say, are you a real person? And that's when Senator Johnson said, I'm going to hold a roundtable and I'm going to make sure people know you're a real person. So, crazy turn of events, but that's kind of, and still to this day, I think everyone has my phone number.
Okay, now, Dr. McCullough, I am not, I know nothing about birth of babies, I really am not. 2020 is like, oh, I gotta learn something about health and, all that. But tell me, just before they get to a vaccine, there's like something just like 5 days of, do you know what I'm talking, 5 days of studies on so many vaccines and before they put it out on the market? That just absolutely shocks me. Is that, can you?
Well, when I was a child, and I'm an internist and cardiologist here in Dallas, Texas, Dr. Peter McCullough. As a child, I think I received 5 vaccines. My children who were born now 30 years ago, they received about 15 vaccines. And a child born today, and this is all before the age of 4, would receive 32 different vaccine doses. So the vaccines have amplified greatly, and I can tell you, when we bring it to our military, particularly those in the service, forward-facing positions. They're some of the fittest, strongest, mentally toughest people that we have. Similar to pro athletes, by the way. These individuals don't need vaccines. It's not a compelling part of military service. Now, do they need training and discipline and lots of push-ups and sit-ups and shooting, all kinds of armaments? Yes. They don't need vaccines to serve in the military or to protect us. Now, as I said in the feature, there could be a circumstance where a particular condition makes it compelling, and between the doctor and the patient, they can decide to take a vaccine. But where a lot of this comes from the Spanish flu epidemic, where the military were disproportionately affected because they were living in barracks. This is about 1918 to 1920. And it was influenza. We had no treatment for it. And largely, the deaths of service members then was actually due to secondary staphylococcal pneumonia. We didn't have antibiotics for staphylococcus either. So the point is, today, with all the modern treatments for all of these diseases, influenza and pertussis and diphtheria and tetanus, what have you, we simply don't need vaccines. It should not be part of the commitment to serve in the military. It shouldn't be a part of commitment to service in healthcare or other parts of American life.
It should be noted that vaccines in the military, we spend about $2 billion a year on countermeasures for the military. So this has been, the number, just like the childhood vaccine schedule, just increases.
Mm.
Then tell me, is there not an anthrax vaccine? I know they had a false start with one, and now they've done another. Can we address that? I mean, I'm just sort of shocked.
I think you can look through the data at smallpox and anthrax, and as I was looking through the DMED data, something that caught my attention was the number of cases of myocarditis across the military used to be about 10. And then you saw in 2002, 2003, it jumped up to 200. And I remember looking at that going, what happened that year? And I Googled, right? And I was, a new smallpox, a new anthrax. You could see these jumps in the data where all of a sudden we create a new baseline where 200, 500, 600 just becomes the new normal for things. And definitely, I don't think anyone could argue that all of these vaccines have made us healthier.
Let me just say that myocarditis is heart damage, and that's the last thing a young man or woman would ever want. And you saw the young man there who suffered Guillain-Barré syndrome. That's paralysis, where he had to go on the mechanical ventilator and have a tracheostomy. Now these are fit, fine individuals who are fine before a vaccine. Remember, these illnesses can always be treated. Influenza can be treated, COVID we could treat. And so the vaccine in these cases and overall, they cause more harm than they provide benefit.
Unlike the childhood schedule, someone going through basic training can get 13 shots in one day.
Wow.
And are we supposed to check and see, okay, you already had the MMR and this and that? Quite frequently, you're just standing in a line, getting shot left and right. And so we have made recommendations that they cease all vaccine mandates and convene an ACIP committee to independently investigate the necessity and safety of all vaccines given into the military. And we are still currently dealing with the whole issue of religious accommodation requests. You would think that from this we had learned, but they've actually made getting a religious accommodation for a vaccine harder, not easier, since this has happened.
And to piggyback off of what Dr. McCullough said, I was in a combat MOS, so I was surrounded by the same people he was referring to. Nobody wanted this shot. Everyone saw it coming. They all said, I'm not getting it, they're gonna have to hold me down, blah, blah, blah. And they used coercive tactics, the same coercive tactics that they ended up using on the civilian sector. And they basically chose, made people choose between your life or your livelihood. And they put commanders in a position to where if you don't get 100% of your people vaccinated, we'll find somebody who will, which created a dog-eat-dog world within the DoD. And people that were meant to protect you were willing to burn you with everything they had in order to get you to comply. And so we can basically extrapolate the same coercive tactics that were used on us onto the civilian sector, and we can begin to prove the premeditated fraud that was committed during the global rollout of mRNA technology.
Well said. Thank you.
I do want to say this. One of the key things that you miss in this video, one, the only doctor really that has to sign off on countermeasures in the military being used across the entire Department of War is the Surgeon General of the Army. During the pandemic, for the first time in the history of the United States Army, the top doctor was not a doctor. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a nurse, he wasn't a PA. He had a bachelor's of science in sociology, so it was close. He is the person that signed off on all of us getting this. That is the first thing. The second thing is, one of the first things that happened was that all JAG officers, which are military attorneys, were ordered not to advise any service members on their rights. So when you do that, with regard to COVID, so if you do that, and you have some private who makes, I don't know, $800 a month or something, they can't afford to go hire a civilian attorney to find out if their commander truly can court-martial them for not taking it. And a lot of what I want people to understand, why was our military treated so viciously? And I'll tell you why. Because if our military had not taken that vaccine, how many people across this country, if they looked and they saw, oh, the military only had 32 deaths and they're not taking this vaccine, how many? It was the biggest endorsement of a product safety that any pharmaceutical could have ever received for the whole globe to go, oh, the United States prize fighting force is taking this. It must be safe. And the other thing to ask is, who didn't take this? China, Russia. Like, you look at what countries didn't take this vaccine and what countries mandated it. These are important things. So allowing a good portion of our military to opt out of this vaccine was never going to happen. I believe because the endorsement of us all taking it was so great, not just across this country, but around the world.
Good point.
And also, there was just so much money behind this technology that if the information within the DoD had gotten out to an already skeptical populace, you wouldn't have been able to give them $1 million to take this. So when people like Ted Macy come out and everyone that reported all the information within the DoD systems, and they had to literally go in and switch out the information in order to run a PR campaign, it was all coercion-based marketing tactics, and we caught them red-handed, and they're basically stacking the deck in their favor, making sure that the true scope of the crime that was committed never sees the light of day, and they're trying to sweep this under the rug so the institution as a whole doesn't have to wear this as a scar on their face. And if we can, I like I said, I served in combat MOS, so I was willing to die for the values that the DoD claims to portray, such as loyalty, duty, respect, honor, selfless sacrifice, and until the rights, until this is righted and the DoD can actually embody those values that it uses as a recruiting tactic for young impressionable men who want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, they're a hollow husk of everything they claim to be, and they don't deserve those men. And this country will fall into ruin if good men are not willing to die on a battlefield for what's behind them. And people that have served in this country since its inception are telling their children to do anything but serve in this United States military. And Trump can try to pretend like there wasn't this mass exodus that took place in the DoD as a direct result of this, and they can try to pretend that recruiting and retention is up, but it's nothing but a PR move against you guys to truly, serves as a pressure release valve against your justified anger. And none of you are angry enough. I'm not angry enough. The crimes that were committed against us are atrocious, and it's generational failure. This is a litmus test for freedom, and this entire country failed miserably.
Sarah, when we were speaking the other night, there was so much that, as a civilian, I just didn't get it from the military. Please go through the list of the coercive tactics that a civilian doesn't have, and when you're discharged without an honorable discharge, you're saying it's like having a felony on your record. That
yes,
is
ma'am.
how it's written. But if you go through that, and then either you and Dr. or all of you, I'm not sure how well it came out in here, but how they were doing the bait and switch with the emergency use versus the FDA approved, that shocked me. And what was that all about? Go ahead.
So the coercive tactics they were using, they were basically just trying to put the pressure on you in any way they could. They would have you stand in separate formations as if you were like the other. They contemplated having people wear separate armbands to designate their vaccination status. We went on a 9-month rotation overseas to Romania, and you saw in the movie the day before we're set to come back. Normally you have, when you're on a deployment, normally you're given a couple weeks to come home, relax, see your family, and wind down. And they knowingly put these young impressionable soldiers in a line the day before we're set to come back to the States and said, hey, if you're not vaccinated, you're unable to go on leave. So they were doing everything they could within their power to squeeze you, okay? But they put the onus on those. This was a top-down mandate, okay? And they used mechanisms to get the people below them to do their dirty work for them, okay? And I'm a member of a class action lawsuit against the United States for what they did to us. And the lawyer in this lawsuit told me one of the greatest things I've ever heard. He said the mafia never handed out job applications. They just gave you an opportunity to capitalize off of their corruption. And that's what they did within the DoD, is they created a system where commanders who were supposed to be a moral superior to the people they served below, they told them, hey, you get your people vaccinated or we'll find somebody who will. And those people who were supposed to be willing to die for you on a battlefield, they failed you in a quiet office behind closed doors, and they were willing to sell out their men for career advancement, for some meaningless speckles on their chest that mean absolutely nothing and destroys the honor and integrity and the value of every life that we've lost on every battlefield since this country began. And it's an unspeakable wrong. And people like Brad Miller talk about a moral injury, okay? I can't explain to you how it feels to be someone who's truly willing to die for what this country means, and to have the very institution that's supposed to portray, it's supposed to be a symbol of that, is willing to grind you down and destroy you and throw you away. We know that we're a tool for the military, but we're supposed to be a righteous tool. And I'm willing to die for a righteous cause, but this was not a righteous cause. And they destroyed everything it means to serve. And you looked at this movie, everyone at the end of this movie said that they would not recommend their people, anyone after them to serve. And that's what we have to fix, because I love this country, all of you love this country, and we have charlatans in representative positions who know what happened to us and refuse. Conservatives are my enemy. The conservative charlatans amongst us who know what happened to us and refuse to say the truth out loud because they want to keep their head conveniently buried in the sand, and they can pretend that they have, plausible deniability. Okay, and so what I've been doing for the last several years in the state of Texas is I established a coalition of other service members in Texas who have tried to bring this to the highest levels of our government, our representation, all the way from my local representative, my Congressman Brian Babin, Senator Ted Cruz. I've personally handed the Declaration of Military Accountability to Greg Abbott himself, looked him in the eyes and begged him for help. Okay, I told him, please help the Texans who are wronged by the federal government. Please represent the people that you're supposed to represent. I've never gotten a single unsolicited phone call from any government official in the entire state of Texas, okay? What they're doing is weaponizing the fact that you don't know about this. I am one disgruntled individual to a congressman who has a Ring doorbell on his door and it doesn't answer when he sees me knocking because he doesn't have answers for me. So we are trying to offload the weight of this. We've been carrying this weight for years, and we're trying to diversify that load onto the shoulders of every American in this country, and we can shake off tyranny like a dog shakes water off its back, okay? My apologies for going so long.
How many in here knew that hundreds of thousands of service members, more than the total number of casualties we lost in World War II, were facing separation for not getting the vaccine? The news did not report on this, and although we truly have no idea what the total number of lost people who either voluntarily left but we ended up kicking out 8,500. To give you a conservative estimate, each one of them cost at least $100,000 to train. How many have we brought back? A few hundred. They're not coming back in, and the people that do want to come back in are being slow rolled because you're depending on the same people who kicked them out to bring them back in. I will tell you that I have two bosses, Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Kennedy. And I will tell you, Secretary Hegseth is working diligently to fix this, but there has been no true accountability for the people that, the doctors, the attorneys, and the chaplains were the three groups that utterly failed our service members, and they have not been held accountable for that. So I want to tell you personally, does it matter for you to go on Twitter and these different forums and reach out and keep this issue, keep encouraging Secretary Hegseth and the Undersecretary of Personnel and Readiness to right this wrong, to go at this aggressively? It was just a few days ago that Secretary Hegseth put out a memo that they were going to convene a panel to look at what happened and accountability. And people need to really encourage that, because if there is a pandemic tomorrow, it would be rinse and repeat. The same people are in positions to cause us the same kind of damage. And so your voice really matters. And I see it because, if they get a big, whole bunch of comments and everything on Twitter, I mean, people are paying attention to the feedback that people are giving.
I wanted to point out that the failures that we saw in the military, and Dr. Long was one of several I was communicating through the entire pandemic in the armed services, was broadly in 2020 the suppression of early treatment. So when severe COVID cases occurred, and there are some senior officers in the military who are at risk, there was a suppression of multi-drug treatment protocols, and we found one of the most valuable drugs was ivermectin, and we had many conversations about how our military can get access to ivermectin. Many were denied. So we saw a suppression of early treatment. We saw the essentially coerced and mandated vaccines, suppression of the reporting of vaccine injuries and manipulation of the data, and suppression actually of the medical treatment of those injuries, including myocarditis and heart failure, blood clots, and sadly deaths that were related to the vaccine. And then I was on Senator Johnson's panel for the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and we generated a Senate report on this. In February of 2021, just 2 months into the vaccine campaign, the Israeli military reported to the White House and Health and Human Services and our Department of Defense that 62 Israeli defense soldiers contracted myocarditis or heart damage, and 2 died directly from it. We saw those communications, we saw the emails, and we saw all the people involved in the White House and Health and Human Services in the military that actively covered up that set of communications so no one in the general public or military would know that the vaccine was capable of killing perfectly healthy soldiers. The Israelis reported that to us, and now, thanks to Senator Johnson, we have that fully captured in a report. So what we need the public to do now is really press our leadership to pursue justice. Now, Rand Paul and Ron Johnson have clearly been the leaders in the U.S. Senate. And Anthony Fauci, according to Rand Paul, has confirmed that he will testify on July 29th in an open session. The last time he testified to Congress was the day just before I testified. We both testified under closed doors at that time. And I was told from my panel that Fauci was completely evasive and none of this was caught on camera. So there's quite an opportunity now if you're able, and I imagine that Senate chamber will be packed. The last time I was there, sadly, it was packed with vaccine-injured people who had blood clots and heart damage and stroke and people in wheelchairs. And so as a medical doctor, and my medical practice is very much focused on these illnesses now, a great mystery to the public and to the medical community is why some people are perfectly fine after these shots with no observable problems, and yet others are gravely damaged. And in my investigations, I've concluded that the earlier shots were far more dangerous than the later shots. So most of the movie was about the whole confronting these very early, very dangerous shots. As the boosters and others rolled out, they were coding for a less lethal spike protein. The second conclusion is that not all the shots were the same. Multiple studies show the vials were quite different. That's the reason why there was a giant issue about whether the military was going to receive an emergency use authorized vaccine or one that had actually had full FDA licensure. Temporarily, Moderna and Pfizer did achieve licensure in late 2021, and by that time, the vaccines may have been safer. We don't know. I don't think any of them, even the ones available today, are safe for human use, any of them, but they were relatively safer. The other thing I found in my investigations is that people who had predisposing conditions were far more likely to have damage. So if someone had a prior blood clot, for instance, watch out. There could be fatal blood clots with the vaccines, which are known to cause blood clots. Or if there were any heart abnormalities, they were far more likely to develop severe heart abnormalities with the vaccines, including heart failure and cardiac arrest. And in my practice today, I still have patients who have taken vaccines and boosters and are presenting with heart failure. I just had one 2 weeks ago in my practice, and I find they have an underlying genetic polymorphism or genetic difference in their heart muscle or blood clotting proteins that make them more susceptible to having a complication. So one of the things that our military never did is they didn't do risk mitigation. That is, figure, okay, we've got a problem, we need to adjust who's going to get the vaccine or when, or better yet, just withdraw the vaccines and recognize there was a problem. They still persisted with boosters, and to this day, it's generally recommended that people get COVID boosters, and those of you in healthcare are facing this. We did an analysis at the McCullough Foundation, and we estimate that about 8.9% of Americans are taking boosters now. It's a pretty small number. It's so small you conclude, why bother? Sadly, those who are getting the boosters are getting it as part of a required schedule for school, for health care. That includes children. The free public, like most people in the room, are not taking boosters, but some still are.
I want to circle back and answer the question on the EUA. So from anthrax and 20 years of litigation, it came out that service members cannot be required to participate in a medical experiment. You cannot order them to take an EUA. The only exception to that is if the President of the United States issues a waiver for informed consent. And in order to do that, there are very, very specific criteria. I want to say there's like 13 criteria. And that never happened. There was never a waiver by President Biden. We had the EUA, and then they said we have FDA approved. But then Pfizer said, we're never going to produce a lot of FDA approved vaccine. So now the soldiers, Secretary Austin comes out and says service members will get an FDA approved vaccine. And that was a lawful order because he was requiring us to get the FDA approved, but it was never available. Then the next thing they did is they came out with what we call a fragmentary order that said unit commanders will ensure enough FDA-approved vaccine is available for their troops. Thereby, when this all goes south, then they can blame the unit commander for not making sure the FDA-approved was available. And then the assistant secretary for, undersecretary for health affairs came out with the infamous interchangeable memo, which stated that the FDA-approved version and the EUA version were interchangeable, thereby giving a green light to commanders to think that they were executing this lawful order. Now, most commanders out there have no clue. I wrote a 7-page memo for my commander explaining exactly what had to be on the vial for it to be an FDA approved. And he was like, you are crazy. You need to stop. The difference is this. I had a soldier, actually Dr. McCullough helped me with this one. He had a completely destroyed heart from, he was 12 days away from finishing the Apache course. He came to me and he said, I have had chest pain so bad every day since I took that vaccine. And last night I was laying in bed. I felt like I was gonna die. And they said, if I make it through the night, if I wake up in the morning, I'm gonna go see Colonel Long. And he had myocarditis. It destroyed his heart. And he looked at me and said, I'm gonna sue. And he pulled out his vaccine card and it said Comirnaty on it. And I said, son, that doesn't exist. You got the EUA. The EUA, you could have two products, the exact same solution in them. If you have an EUA lot number, you cannot sue. If you have the FDA approved version and it's not on the childhood vaccine schedule, you could sue. So what did they do? They rushed getting the vaccine on the childhood vaccination schedule, even though it wasn't affecting children. And they never produced that FDA approved vial until I'm not even sure that it even exists today.
Just temporarily in 2021, both Pfizer and Moderna achieved full FDA approval. And the difference is emergency use authorization, the safety information is blank on the package insert. So you actually, as a recipient, you can't know what the side effects are because they're not disclosed to you. You can't give informed consent. The fully licensed, there is a package insert that lists side effects. So the temporarily, the first two versions of Pfizer and Moderna did eventually receive emergency use authorization. The first set of boosters, or did receive full FDA licensure, and then the full set of boosters. And then when they got to the second boosters, they simply relied on animal data. So they no longer were FDA approved. So we went through several cycles of boosters that were still under emergency use authorization. Now President Biden ended the pandemic emergency status in May of 2023. And HHS Secretary Becerra ended the public health emergency about 2 weeks later. So when there's no public health emergency or national emergency, there can't be any emergency use authorization for the products. So what we've seen here is wholesale corruption of all of the regulations. I don't think, whether it was commonality or not, these are legal angles. I don't think any of them would be honored by a system that was corrupt at multiple levels here. Nobody was playing by the rules.
Certainly, and to piggyback off of what you said, the interchangeability memo was a direct response. Like, this didn't happen overnight. This was played out over a long period of time. And there were people like myself who knew that the DoD didn't have the FDA-approved products that they were mandating us to take. So we were telling our leadership, hey, as soon as you can provide that to me, I'll take it. And that put them and we had them in a checkmate, basically. And they had to come out with this memo to blur those lines because we had them dead to rights. So the interagency collusion and the complexity of all of these moves that they were making, that alone from the inside of the machine showed a level of premeditation that had to be a crime. Okay,
Yes.
like never before has any government agency worked in tandem with one another with such efficiency as the FDA, the DoD, and all these other government agencies that were passing these. It was like they were all sitting in the same exact room, running plays in tandem. And so within the institution, you could see that, and that was what led to this pushback. And so Terry Aderim had to come out and blur the lines, and that caused chaos within the people down the stream who weren't JAG officers, who were just reading what was passed on to them, and they basically say they don't understand the minutiae distinctions between the FDA products and the EUA products that we were being mandated to take.
Should we take questions?
Yeah, you know what, can I just, yes, I want to talk just to the little shy girl down at the end there. If you do not know Rebecca Hardy, she is Texans for Vaccine Choice.
I am anything, but I am not shy.
Yeah, no, she is not shy. She's lovely and she's a happy warrior and an amazing warrior. So I know when we talked, just amongst other things, you're saying that you are really concentrating, and this is for our mere mortals that do not have the military background, but on Texas and actually working things through Texas. And can you kind of tell us, give us a big...
You know, there's just a lot that I just feel like an imposter up here because you guys that sacrifice so much, like, I mean, I know, I just can't. I mean, Dr. Long in that movie, when you take that big weighted pause about your regret, I saw this on the premiere night a couple of weeks ago, and it just broke me. And I have just kept you in my prayers since, and I know that there's a lot of people in here that feel the same way, and Derek, you too. I mean, I work at Texans for Vaccine Choice. There was no vaccine mandate for me, right? And but there were so many that lost their livelihoods that I was dealing with, but it's just, you don't know what's going on in the military, and so I just want to commend you for your bravery, because most of us just don't even know a sliver of it, so thank you.
I do want to highlight Lance Castle, the story you saw of the cell extraction. That dude's one of the most gangster dudes amongst us, all right? He's still suffering, all right? He was given a sham of a court-martial. He was put up on trumped-up charges, found innocent on all charges, and then sent back to the same corrupt leadership that was putting him on those Trump charges, where they inevitably found some factoid where they could put him up on a crime where he basically called his leadership criminally incompetent. And now he's being charged with disrespecting a superior officer. So he loses all of his rank, he's stripped of everything. The dude, both of his kids were born while he was in pretrial confinement for a crime that wasn't even a crime. So, like, stories like that, I didn't do a thing compared to stuff like that.
Mind-blowing.
And there's thousands of people suffering in silence. Until the institution has to admit this at the highest level, the onus is on the individual to prove the crimes that were committed against us to every government agency that we have to come to. So, like, my apologies. The onus is still on the individual until the DoD as a whole has to wear this on their face. So the crime was committed at the highest level. It needs to be taken, they need to take accountability at the highest level and let that trickle downwards.
I can't talk specifically about what I'm doing right now, but there is a massive effort underway, and I will tell you this. In the phone calls I continue to receive You know, I recently had a phone call from a mother who had triplets, and her husband were in the military, and 2 out of the 3 went into the military. One went to West Point, or the Naval Academy, and one went to the Air Force Academy. I mean, we're talking top tier individuals. Both females got their hearts destroyed. 2 out of 3. And to listen to parents call me on a regular basis. Their children did nothing wrong. They didn't drink and drive. They didn't make reckless decisions. They weren't irresponsible using drugs. The biggest mistake they made in their life was following what they thought was a lawful order, and it destroyed their lives. And to have parents calling you and saying, my kid has to move back in with me after they graduated from West Point, or they were out on their own because now they have debilitating multiple sclerosis, or they have all these autoimmune diseases. This is what absolutely infuriates me. And you're right, that people are not angry enough. The bar was so low, 32 dead attributed to the infection. That is such a low bar. The COVID infection didn't even come in the top 10 things killing soldiers. It wasn't even there. And so I can't imagine sitting in a meeting room and saying, hey, the infection killed 32 people on active duty. Do you think we should risk the health of 1.3 million with something we have no idea what it's going to do? That's exactly what happened. That compromised our national security to a level that most people can't comprehend. Would our adversaries love to get a needle in every arm with some unknown experimental substance? You damn right they would.
There probably shouldn't have been any deaths if they were properly treated early. Probably many were senior, not young people, but senior people in administration or logistics.
Yeah, and we learned at Fort Detrick from SARS-CoV-1 that it was treated with hydroxychloroquine, and we have stockpiles of it across the country. And why we didn't tap into these things, even on my post, I said to the commanders, hey, why don't we offer hydroxychloroquine to everyone? We're on a small post out in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. And while they're doing this study on the vaccine, we'll be able to determine whether or not this works. We'll be able to gather enough data. And I was told to sit down, shut up, and color. That didn't work so well for them. But,
praise God for that.
Yeah.
You're unable to push an experimental product to market if there's a generic alternative available. So what they did was strategically running billion-dollar marketing campaigns against the generic alternative that you can't corner the market on. You can't, dominate, all the money being brought in from it. And they were trying to shoehorn $1 trillion technology onto the American, global populace.
And the messenger RNA influenza vaccine is coming to a Walgreens or CVS, to any of these pharmacies near you come August, I believe.
Next month.
Yeah, both influenza and respiratory syncytial virus vaccines now are messenger RNA. And I can tell you, as an internist and cardiologist who's practicing, I'm very concerned. We recently reported in a patient of mine that the messenger RNA, the synthetic genetic material that's injected, was circulating in my patient's bloodstream 3.5 years after his Pfizer shot, still producing the spike protein that caused his blood clots and heart damage. So the messenger RNA vaccines, for some reason, now have been given a green light to have no scrutiny on preclinical safety or potential harm that can happen. I'm greatly concerned this whole vaccine industry has gone completely out of control.
It's market capture.
Let's see, I could ask you a million questions, but I guess I'll open it up. So Mike, you have one, Mike, and then, let's see, who else? Would someone grab another mic up here? Yeah, would you guys share one? That'd be great. Okay, and let's come on down and let's get some quick questions
We'll get a quick
going.
answer.
Remember, shortest question wins the day.
Can I,
Go ahead.
can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
My son is a new Marine officer, and I don't know, he did not take the COVID shot before he left, and are they still issuing those?
So know that you're not required to take the COVID shot. Over 500,000 COVID vaccines were given last year in the Department of War. Those were voluntary. He can apply for a religious accommodation, but right now we're finding out that that is just, and it's not the Secretary of War's intent, but that's what's happening, is that they are not being considered.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the movie. Real quick, there were 2 action items that came up at the end of the movie, and I didn't have my phone out, so I couldn't take a picture of the screen. And I just looked up the website for the movie, and it wasn't on there. Is there any way that we can get those 2 action items printed?
I believe one of them was to contact your local representatives about the Bashaw Act.
Right, and then
Yes.
the White House too, but the verbiage is what I wanted.
Okay.
It was an executive order.
There's an open letter to the American people from their signatories as a declaration of military accountability, January 1st, 2024. That's on the resource sheet, if that's military.
So for the doctors, there's an undercurrent of promotion for the shingles vaccine, and this is a room that would be a candidate for the shingles vaccine. You mentioned a couple of other vaccines, that there's a protective effect for type 3 diabetes, dementia, which is now a new epidemic in our country. Can you comment about the protective effect of the shingles vaccine to prevent dementia?
Briefly, for a vaccine to have a benefit, it must be a declared endpoint in a randomized trial. So anything we see just by observation in the community, and you'll see for vaccines claims that there's lower rates of dementia or lower rates of other problems. It's what's called healthy vaccinee bias, that people who are healthy are more concerned about their health tend to take vaccines. Those people who are sick and decrepit and have lots of serious medical problems that typically don't go to vaccine centers. And so that form of confounding, there's also a bias involved. Usually the people who are publishing these types of manuscripts have a stake in the outcome. They want to continue to show these purported benefits. None of them are valid unless we have a randomized trial. In fact, McCullough Foundation, we have a big analysis out that vaccinations, when we actually adjust for these confounders, may be associated with dementia, to be honest with you. So they cause inflammation, and if there's inflammation in the body and the brain, that's not good.
What about shingles? Thank you.
My question is about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. My husband is also deployed overseas, and because he's a civilian contractor, got the choice. He chose the Johnson & Johnson. I think, if I remember correctly, on your recommendation, Rebecca. Did the military get that choice?
The Johnson & Johnson did fulfill the requirement. I would just say personally, having looked at thousands of adverse event reports, J&J actually was one of the lower complication vaccines that I saw, but we also had the lowest number of people took the J&J.
I agree.
In May of 2019, the People's Daily, which is the Communist Party's mouthpiece, stated that people's war exists, and that was their declaration of war. And then SARS-CoV-2, a low-grade bioweapon, was dropped on the world. So when Fauci, Francis Collins, and Peter Daszak and others aided the CCP in their act of war and murder against the people of the United States, they fulfilled the Constitution's definition of treason, which is an executable offense.
Yes.
When you aid the enemy in an act of war, and in this case hundreds of thousands of Americans died, that is treason. So when Rand Paul, and I compliment what he's doing with regard to charging Fauci with lying against Congress, but that's kind of a pansy charge. Well, is there any way we can up the ante?
Well,
Treason.
I think, again, are we angry enough about what happened? And does this just get lost in a whole bunch of other crises that just keep popping up? Or do people like yourselves continually push for accountability? That is the most critical thing, believe it or not. The people up there seem to only care about,
The power of exponents.
What I've said publicly is that the crimes of the creation of the virus, which all our intelligence agencies agree was created in the Chinese biosecurity lab, and 97% of us got the virus. How many of you in the room got the COVID virus? So all of us have actually had a virus that was created in a Chinese biosecurity lab. I mean, that's a mind-blowing reality, but the crimes of everybody involved in this are fraud, that we were deceived from this in the very beginning, fraudulent concealment, and then mass negligent homicide, because people did die of the pandemic. They died of the infection. Some of our senior citizens and very chronically ill people did die, and then people died from the vaccine. And so, so the treasonous act of this rises to the level through those crimes. The only way to get to that, in my view, because the government has its own conflict of interest, is for the assignment of a special prosecutor, somebody who's independent. And that would right now be Todd Blanche, who's leaving the Department of Justice, to make that assignment. So if there's any pressure point there, getting Fauci up in front of the Senate or Congress is keeping the light on this. But we have to have a special. Listen, if we've had a special counsel for the Durham report and for Russian collusion, come on, we can have a special counsel for COVID.
Thank you for being here and doing this. Thank you. Rebecca, excuse me, I was called you Teresa. Okay, so I'm Molly, and I'm really glad that you're here. In a graduate statistics class, we found that the research that they used to try to justify the mandate was not as statistically credible. And so I appreciate those that stood up. My question is this: can you make the distinction, and I think it'll even add more to what you're saying, but can you make the distinction between the fact that the vaccines were not FDA approved, and then there's like nutrition items in nutrition stores that aren't necessarily FDA approved because those companies didn't go that route, but they're US approved and they're available for sale and available for consumption and have been approved? Can you make the difference? Because it validates your point that it didn't reach the safety standard to even
yes,
push in that way.
but no one was mandating that people take supplements from the GNC, and so completely, when you're in uniform, in fact, the Nuremberg Code talks about how informed consent is essential, but it also talks about the power differential in a military, and that is an environment most ripe for abuse when you're having a lieutenant colonel ordering a private to take something. So.
Yes. My name is Nate Weymouth. I'm a cell biologist by 30 years. I founded a vaccine company. My dad was vaccine insured. I have a simple question. I've investigated this and talked to Robert Malone and Jay Bhattacharya. The problem is, why is Heidi Overton blocking any sort of effort for a moratorium on the mRNA vaccines? And every effort is to try to fire them or force out anyone in the government that's critical of them. When I talk to Jay Bhattacharya, which I have an appointment, what should I talk about and how can I get a meeting with Ms. Overton?
All I can say is when I turned in the DMED data to Senator Ron Johnson, Moderna lost $140 billion within a few hours. So you tell me, who had $140 billion worth of stock? And tell me, you lose that much in stock and you don't go bankrupt. So
Cover-up.
the amount of money
Insider trading.
is unbelievable.
Can you help me?
The-
My father's dead.
Well, listen, the vaccines are being purchased by our government and not being used. They're actually poured down the drain, even for this fall. I think about $1.2 billion or more was spent on both Pfizer and Moderna. We've done the analysis. Americans aren't taking these vaccines, but our government is still purchasing them.
We need to vote on tax.
For Moderna, the patent royalty rights on the COVID vaccine go back to government officials in the National Institutes of Health. Pfizer, they go to BioNTech, and a big investor there is Bill Gates of the Gates Foundation, who's been on Capitol Hill testifying about his nefarious activities. What we see here is deep and broad corruption for unbridled vaccine purchases of products that do not pass muster for safety. We think in the vaccine world, this is the tip of the iceberg. This actually may have been going on at a lower level now for, honestly, it may have gone on for hundreds of years and have just been baked into this what I call vaccine madness. But for messenger RNA, there's a paper by Lalani and colleagues, it's published in British Medical Journal, it's astounding. These vaccines have been in development since 1985. There's been plenty of time to figure out how they're eliminated from the body, where they biodistribute, all of the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. None of this has been done. To this day, no one knows when we take one of these shots, where it goes in the body and how long it lasts. Our research suggests, alarmingly, that these last in the body for years without being broken down, and then at least part of it is permanently integrated into the human genetic code. This is disturbing, as these companies have dozens of these vaccines to replace the old vaccines across all the infectious diseases.
I think at this point, that was such an amazing answer, and so sort of round it up. I think we're going to stop there. We do have a little reception in the lobby, and you can come and speak. Yes, please.
I just want to say this real quick. Throughout this pandemic, the most common thing I heard from people was, I can't step forward because I'm just a mom, I'm just a dad, I'm just a private, I'm just a lieutenant. I want to tell you that when you are operating in God's will and purpose, you are just a force of nature.
All right. With that, thank you so
Okay,
much.
great. And let's let them slip out real quick, and then you guys please come out and join them. And the mom of the new Marine, I have a DVD for you. Great question. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, very good job. Congratulations.
Just north of Dayton. Northeast Houston.